Snow didn't fall like weather. It fell like a decision, the kind that muffled the world just enough for men to believe they could do something unforgivable and let the forest bury it for them. Officer Ethan Cole moved through Black Ridge the way he'd learned to move through any hostile environment. Not fast, not loud, not hopeful, purposeful, measured. His boots found the firmer patches where wind had scoured the ground. His shoulders stayed loose, his hands stayed warm inside gloves he never took off unless he had to. Beside him, K9 Shadow padded with quiet certainty, black and tan coat dusted with flakes, breath steaming in short, controlled bursts. Shadow wasn't alert in the cartoon sense, not head high, tail waving, searching for drama. Shadow was assembled, every muscle in its assigned place, every ear and antenna, every pause, intentional. And tonight, the pauses were getting longer. Ethan didn't need a radio update to know something had shifted in the forest. He could feel it in the absence of small things, no distant owl calls, no scatter of rabbits, no casual movement in the underbrush. Nature didn't go silent for no reason. Silence was either fear or coordination. Shadow stopped, not a stumble, an absolute halt, like someone had pressed a switch. Ethan stopped with her. The dog's ears rotated once, then locked toward the southeast. Her breathing changed. Not faster, shallower, the kind of breath that said, "I smell something I don't like, and it's moving." Ethan followed the direction with his eyes. At first he saw nothing but the slope and the thick dark of pine trunks. Then, through the snow haze, he caught it. Two faint moving points of light threading between trees. Not bright enough to be hikers' headlamps. Not steady enough to be a ranger patrol, more like someone trying not to be seen, while still needing to see. "Shadow," Ethan whispered. He didn't give commands when she was reading the world. He gave her permission. Shadow's tail didn't rise. Her body didn't surge forward. She simply angled her head and took 2 slow steps as if stepping into a story she already knew the ending to. Ethan's throat tightened, not from fear, but from the familiar sensation of alignment. The click of scattered details becoming one picture. This isn't a rescue. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they were doing, hunting. A soft crunch of snow came from behind, close enough that Ethan felt it more than heard it. Shadow's head snapped back, but she didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just pivoted, smooth, silent, and fixed her eyes on the tree line behind them. Ethan turned. A figure stumbled into view, too loud, too fast, too human. Deputy Lucas Reed. He wasn't dressed for casual hiking. Department winter gear, utility belt, gloves, hat pulled low. His face was red from cold and exertion, and when he saw Ethan, he didn't look relieved, so much as desperate. "Cole?" Lucas breathed, like the name itself was a lifeline. "Thank God. I've been looking for you." Ethan's gaze didn't soften. It sharpened. "Looking for me," Ethan repeated. Lucas nodded hard. Ethan's gaze didn't soften. It sharpened. "Looking for me," Ethan repeated. Lucas nodded hard. "We've got a situation. It came through. Missing rescue team. They went in near River Spur and never checked out. Captain Hayes has people moving, but—" His words caught. "They said you're closest. Said you're already up here with Shadow. Said I should find you and bring you in." "They," Ethan said quietly. Lucas blinked. "Dispatch? Or I don't know. Someone on the channel." Ethan held Lucas's eyes. Lucas was a good kid. Rookie energy, too much heart. Still believed the right thing should be enough, but his pupils were wide. His hands kept moving, adjusting his gloves, gripping his strap, touching his radio like he didn't trust it to stay real. "Say it again," Ethan said. "What exactly did you hear?" Lucas swallowed. "Rescue team, 2 personnel, last known location near River Spur. They didn't hit their check-in. Then the voice said to bring you in quiet, no full broadcast. Keep it clean." Ethan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Not fear, recognition. He'd heard that language before in a different life, rooms where decisions were made with calm voices and the consequences were blood. Keep it clean. He glanced at Shadow. Her ears were still angled toward the southeast lights, but her nose had shifted, subtly sampling Lucas, reading his adrenaline, the chemical signature of panic, the trace of something else beneath it. Lucas's radio crackled. Not a clean transmission, static. A jittering pulse that sounded wrong, too rhythmic to be weather. Lucas flinched like the radio had touched him. Ethan lifted his own handheld from his coat pocket and clicked it once. Silence. Not dead battery silence, not out of range. Just absence. like the forest had swallowed the frequency. Ethan looked at Lucas again. "When did you last get a clean signal?" Lucas hesitated. That was answer enough. Ethan's mind ran through options the way it always did under pressure: fast, brutal, efficient. If Lucas was bait, they'd already won. If Lucas wasn't bait, then he was being used, and someone was trying to drag Ethan and Shadow into a location of their choosing. Either way, staying on this trail, where Ethan had control, was better than letting someone else set the board. Ethan leaned closer to Lucas, keeping his voice low. "Lucas, did you see anyone else on your way here?" "No," Lucas said quickly, then slower. I saw lights once, through the trees. Thought it was another unit." Ethan's gaze flicked past Lucas's shoulder. "Where?" Lucas pointed toward the southeast, the same direction Shadow had locked onto. Ethan felt the last piece click into place. They sent the rookie to fetch the dog and handler, and they're already positioned to guide the route. "Okay," Ethan said. Lucas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since he got the call. "Okay, so we go to River Spur." "No," Ethan said. Lucas froze. "What?" Ethan's eyes stayed calm. His voice stayed even. That steadiness was the difference between panic and survival. "We don't go where someone tells us to go," Ethan said. "Not on a channel that can't stay clean." Lucas stared. "Cole, people might be hurt." Ethan nodded once. "That's why we're going to verify before we commit." Lucas's jaw tightened, the rookie part of him bristling at hesitation. Ethan recognized it. He didn't blame it. He just couldn't afford it. Shadow stepped closer to Lucas, nose low, a slow circle. Then she stopped at Lucas's right side, her head tilted. Ethan watched her. Shadow wasn't aggressive. She wasn't accusing. She was reading the thing that humans missed, the truth in scent. Stress hormones, metal, fabric. The invisible map of where Lucas had been and what he'd touched. Shadow's tail moved once, not wagging, not warning. Neutral, meaning he's not the threat. Ethan felt his shoulders loosen by a fraction. "Lucas," Ethan said quietly, "why did you really come up here tonight?" Lucas blinked fast. His breath hitched, and Ethan saw it. The moment the kid realized the lie wouldn't protect him anymore. Lucas's hand drifted toward the inside of his jacket. Not for his weapon, for something else. His fingers closed around an object hidden under the lining, and he pulled it free, small, wrapped in plastic, taped tight against moisture. A drive. And with it, folded paper, printed pages, edges worn from being handled too many times. Lucas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I think someone wants this gone. And I didn't know where else to take it." Ethan didn't reach for it. He didn't even look at it at first. He looked at Lucas. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Lucas's eyes shone with fear and shame. I was doing evidence transport, just routine. I saw the label didn't match the case number. I checked the log and—" He swallowed. "It didn't exist, but it was signed off like it did. Same signature, same authorization stamp, over and over." Ethan's stomach hardened. "Who signed it?" Ethan asked. Lucas's throat worked. "Captain Hayes." "But—" Lucas rushed, words tumbling. "I don't think it's her. I think someone's using her authority, or forcing it. Or—" Ethan didn't respond with reassurance. He responded with action. He pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal bars. He stared at it, then at the sky through the trees. "Move," Ethan said. Lucas blinked. "Where?" "Higher ground, 2 minutes. We make a call." Ethan didn't explain. Explanation took time. Time got people killed. Shadow moved first, already understanding the shape of the command. She took the slope in a diagonal line where snow was thinnest, pause, finding hidden rock, body low and efficient. Lucas followed, stumbling at first, then adjusting. Ethan stayed behind him, not because Lucas needed protection, but because Ethan needed to see what came from behind. They climbed. Snow thickened in some pockets, crusted thin in others. Branches snapped underfoot, and each sound felt too loud. At the top of the small ridge, the world opened just enough that Ethan could see the faint outline of the valley below, and the moving lights, still there, still circling. Ethan stopped and held up 2 fingers. Lucas went still, chest heaving. Shadow's ears rotated once, then locked again. Southeast. Ethan raised the phone again. 1 bar, then 2. A fragile miracle. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hesitate. He hit the speed dial he'd programmed months ago and prayed the forest gave him enough air to push words through. It rang once, twice, then connected. "Captain Hayes," a voice answered, clipped and calm, the kind of calm that meant she'd been holding chaos together with both hands. "Cole, report." Ethan didn't waste time. "Captain, I'm in Black Ridge with Shadow. Lucas is with me." A pause. "Lucas?" Ethan heard it in her tone. "Lucas should not be with you." "Someone pushed a quiet rescue call to Lucas," Ethan continued. "River Spur, missing team story. Comms are dirty. I suspect engineered misdirection." Hayes went silent for half a beat, processing, recalculating. "Cole," she said carefully, "I did not authorize any quiet rescue routing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Copy. Lucas is carrying physical evidence, documents, and a drive linked to an internal authorization pattern using your signature." Hayes inhaled sharply. It was the only crack Ethan ever heard in her control. "Put Dr. Moore on," Ethan said. Another pause. Then Hayes. "Stand by." A click. A shift in the line. Then a new voice, lower, thoughtful, like she was always listening to something behind the words. "Ethan," Dr. Lena Moore said, "I'm here." Ethan kept his eyes on the valley. "Lena, we've got comm interference and a probable lure. I need you to treat the call as compromised. Can you verify procedural anomalies on dispatch?" "I can," Lena said, already moving mentally, "but it depends what logs survived." Ethan's voice stayed flat. "Assume someone is deleting." Lena didn't argue. "Then we have to pull from redundancies, radio tower handshake logs, time-stamped routing fingerprints, the kind of metadata people forget exists." Ethan felt a grim approval. That was why Hayes trusted Lena. She didn't just see evidence, she saw how evidence tried to disappear. Hayes came back on. "Cole, what do you need?" Ethan made the decision. Clear, simple. "I need you to treat me as off-grid, no standard chatter. If this is internal, any broadcast puts us in a coffin." Hayes's tone hardened. "Understood." Ethan glanced at Lucas. The kid's face was pale under the cold. He looked like he wanted to apologize for existing. Ethan didn't give him that burden. "Captain," Ethan said, "I'm not taking the bait. I'm flipping it." Hayes went quiet. Then, "Say it." Ethan's eyes narrowed toward the moving lights. "If they're hunting for the evidence Lucas has, they'll try to isolate us. I'm going to force them into a contained encounter where we can extract proof, audio, devices, whatever they use to coordinate." Hayes's voice tightened. "Cole." "I know," Ethan said. "No hero moves, no chaos, containment." A beat. Then Hayes. "I'm with you. What's your location?" Ethan gave it to her in coordinates. Hayes said, "I'm sending no one in from local units. I'm calling this directly to state-level oversight through trusted channels. Lena will document the comm anomalies. You keep yourselves alive." Ethan didn't promise. He never promised survival. He promised work. "Copy," Ethan said. "We move now." He ended the call before the fragile signal died. The forest swallowed the connection again immediately, like it resented the intrusion. Lucas stared at him. "Captain Hayes didn't send me." "No," Ethan said. Lucas swallowed. "So, who did?" Ethan looked down toward the lights, the slow circling, the patient coordination. "The kind of people who don't need to wear a face," Ethan said. "Just authority." Shadow shifted closer to Ethan's leg, pressing warm weight into his knee. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Ethan adjusted his gloves, checked his flashlight, checked the leash, more out of habit than necessity. Then he made the decision the way he made every decision that mattered. Not with fear. With clarity. "We're not running blind," Ethan said. "We're making them show their hand." Lucas's voice trembled. "How?" Ethan turned and started down the ridge, not toward River Spur, but along a contour line that kept them in cover while offering sight lines. "By letting them think we're doing what they want," Ethan said, "and then stopping them where they can't rewrite the story." They moved. Shadow led, careful not to leave a clean trail. Ethan guided Lucas to step where rock broke snow, where tree roots made the ground uneven enough to mask prints. The air grew colder as the wind shifted. Ethan felt it on the back of his neck, the sensation of being watched. Not imagined, not paranoia. The real physical pressure of eyes behind trees. Shadow's ears twitched once, then twice, then locked. Ethan stopped. He didn't look around wildly. Wild movement was prey behavior. He lowered his head slightly, listening. A faint crunch. Delayed, carefully spaced. Not one person, more than one. Lucas whispered, "Cole." Ethan lifted a hand. Silence. Shadow's body went rigid. Then she did something she rarely did. She stepped in front of Lucas. Not aggressive, protective. Ethan felt a hard calm settle into him like armor. Here it is. The confrontation didn't begin with gunfire. It began with a sound that didn't belong, an electronic pulse, faint but precise, like someone tuning the air itself. Lucas's radio, clipped to his jacket, suddenly hissed. A burst of static. Then silence. Not dead, muted. Ethan's handheld did the same. It wasn't no signal. It was suppression. Lucas looked like he might throw up. "There—" "I know," Ethan said. He moved Lucas behind a fallen pine that formed a natural barrier, cover from sight, not a bunker. Ethan didn't believe in bunkers without exits. Shadow stayed forward, body angled toward the tree line where the pressure lived. Ethan whispered into her ear, the softest cue, "Hold." Shadow didn't move. She didn't bark. She became a line. Ethan leaned close to Lucas, voice barely more than breath. "You're going to do exactly what I say." Lucas nodded hard, eyes wide. Ethan's mind mapped the terrain. Trees spaced uneven, a shallow dip to the left, rocks to the right. A narrow corridor of visibility dead ahead. If they wanted to isolate them, they'd come from that corridor. Humans preferred predictable paths, even when they believed they were being clever. Ethan's hand went to his belt, not drawing, just ready. Then he saw it. Movement between trees. Not a hiker, not a deputy. A figure in winter gear that didn't match any department issue Ethan had ever seen. Neutral colors, no reflective patches, no chatter, and a second behind him. They didn't approach like people with good intentions. They approached like people with an assignment. Shadow's lip lifted just enough to show one tooth. Ethan's chest went tight. Not panic, but the exact opposite. The dead calm focus that came when things stopped being theoretical. The first figure stepped into the corridor, stopping at the edge of open ground, as if aware that crossing it was crossing into consequence. Ethan didn't call out. He didn't demand identification. He didn't perform. He let them reveal themselves. The figure lifted a hand and made a small gesture, 2 fingers together, then down. A quiet signal to someone else. Then Ethan heard it, faint, carried through the snow, the soft click of a device being adjusted. They're building the box. Lucas's breathing turned sharp and fast. Ethan gripped Lucas's shoulder. Not comfort, control. "Breathe," Ethan whispered. "Don't give them panic." Lucas swallowed air like he was drowning. Shadow took 1 step forward. The pursuer froze. That was the moment it turned. Not because of a bark, because of a dog's absolute certainty. The figure's posture changed, tightening, hand drifting lower as if toward a concealed weapon. Ethan moved. He didn't charge. He didn't shoot. He shifted laterally into the dip, dragging Lucas with him, staying in cover while changing the geometry. And in that movement, he forced the pursuers to make a choice, follow and commit, or retreat and lose control of the engagement. Shadow moved with him, perfectly synced, staying between Ethan's group and the corridor. The second figure stepped into view now, just a silhouette, but enough to confirm the count, more than 2, because Ethan could feel others beyond them, spacing themselves. "Lucas," Ethan whispered, "they don't want to fight. They want a story, an accident, a disappearance. You don't give them that." Lucas's voice shook. "So what do we do?" Ethan's eyes stayed on Shadow. "We turn their story into evidence," Ethan said. He reached into Lucas's jacket and pulled the drive and papers free, fast, controlled. "Hold this," Ethan said, pressing it into Lucas's hands again. "You do not drop it. You do not run unless I tell you." Lucas nodded, knuckles white around the plastic. Ethan leaned closer. "When I say now, you are going to speak loud. You are going to say exactly what I tell you. Understand?" Lucas's eyes flicked toward the shadows. "They'll hear me." "That's the point," Ethan said. Shadow's ears rotated again. A soft crunch from the right. Closer than before. They were tightening the circle. Ethan made the decision he'd been building toward since the first moving light. He wasn't going to flee until the forest swallowed them. He was going to contain this, force it into a shape that couldn't be denied. He lifted his flashlight, kept it off. Not yet. Light was control, but only when used at the right moment. Ethan's voice went low. "Lucas, ready." Lucas's lips trembled. "Ready." Shadow's body dropped, slightly lower, weight shifting forward. Ethan whispered the cue she loved most because it meant the world had finally made sense. "Shadow, watch." And then, in the exact instant the nearest pursuer took one more step into open ground, Ethan snapped his flashlight on. A hard white beam cut through the snow, blasting the figure's face and chest, forcing an instinctive flinch. At the same time, Ethan spoke, loud enough to carry through the trees, "Police K9, stop where you are." He didn't have a radio signal. He didn't have backup on the ridge. But he did have something humans feared more than guns, a clear, authoritative narrative. The figure froze, hand half raised, caught mid-choice. Ethan's beam held steady. Shadow didn't bark. She didn't lunge. She simply stood, head high, eyes locked, the embodiment of consequence. Ethan's voice cut again, louder. "Lucas, now." Lucas's voice cracked, then rose. "This is Deputy Lucas Reed. I have evidence of internal routing fraud using Captain Hayes' authorization. Whoever is jamming our comms, you're on record." The words sounded insane in the woods, but that was the beauty of it. If someone was trying to erase you, you didn't whisper. You made the act of erasing you expensive. The pursuer shifted. Ethan saw the hesitation. Not moral hesitation, operational. Because now the situation had changed. Now if Lucas vanished, it wasn't just a missing deputy. It was a deputy who publicly declared he had evidence right before he disappeared. That wasn't clean. That wasn't quiet. That wasn't easy. Ethan's phone buzzed once in his pocket, one fragile bar returning for a heartbeat, like the forest exhaled. He didn't check it. He didn't need it. He had what he came for. The enemy's hand exposed. Shadow's ears pivoted one more time, tracking retreating steps. Ethan realized the circle wasn't closing anymore. It was adjusting. They were recalculating. He leaned close to Lucas, voice low again. Good. That made them nervous. Lucas whispered, "Are we safe?" Ethan didn't lie. No? He scanned the trees, listening to the way snow fell, the way it landed on branches, the way it covered sound. Then he made the next decision, the one that separated survival from victory. "We're moving to a place where terrain forces contact," Ethan said. "A contained space. They'll come, but they'll come on our terms." Lucas swallowed. "Where?" Ethan looked at Shadow. Shadow looked back like she already knew. Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Forward," he said. And they disappeared into the trees, Ethan leading with purpose, Lucas clutching proof like it was oxygen, and Shadow moving like the forest itself had chosen a side. Far away in the world of radios and offices and fluorescent lights, Captain Maria Hayes was already making calls to people who didn't answer to local authority. And Dr. Lena Moore was already pulling invisible threads, handshake logs, routing fingerprints, the quiet math of betrayal. But out here, beneath pine and snow, it wasn't paperwork that kept you alive. It was timing, discipline, and a dog who didn't need words to decide what mattered. They didn't run. Running meant noise, panic, straight lines. Ethan chose angles. He cut east along the ridge for 30 meters, then dropped into a narrow gully where wind had scoured the snow thin enough to expose stone. Shadow adjusted without command, paws landing on rock, minimizing track. Lucas followed, breath loud in his own ears, the drive and documents clutched under his jacket like a heartbeat he could protect with pressure, alone. Behind them, the forest changed tone. Not the open crunch of pursuit, the careful absence of it. "They're not chasing," Lucas whispered. "They are," Ethan said, "just not the way you expect." Shadow's head tilted once, then she angled downhill, nose sampling air that moved differently in the cut of the terrain. Ethan let her choose the path for 5 strides, then nudged left toward a shallow ravine he knew from years of walking these woods. A ravine meant edges. Edges meant choke points. Choke points meant control. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked again, unable to stop himself. "Old maintenance shed," Ethan said. "Logging company abandoned it 15 years ago. 1 door, 2 small windows, steel walls." Lucas swallowed. "That sounds like a trap." "It is," Ethan said evenly. "For them." They reached the ravine lip and slid down into it. Snow thinned here, packed by wind and shadow. The trees grew closer together, forcing single-file movement. Shadow stopped again. Ethan froze behind her. A faint hum threaded the air, subtle but mechanical. Not wind, not wildlife. electronic. Lucas's radio flickered with static, then died completely. Ethan pulled his handheld out. Dead. He nodded once. "They've moved the jammer," he said. "Closer." Lucas's voice wavered. "So we're cut off." Ethan glanced at him. "We were cut off the second they tried to lure you." Shadow stepped forward again, but slower now, more deliberate. The ravine bent sharply, then opened into a small clearing no bigger than a tennis court. At its far edge stood the shed Ethan remembered. Rusted corrugated steel, roof sagging slightly under snow weight, one door hanging crooked on reinforced hinges. Perfect. Ethan motioned Lucas to the side of the door. "Inside," Ethan whispered. Lucas hesitated. "What if they lock us in?" "They won't," Ethan said. "They don't want a barricade. They want movement, panic, a fall, hypothermia, a clean narrative." Lucas's face went pale. Shadow pressed her shoulder briefly into Lucas's knee, one silent reassurance, then slipped past him and into the shed. Ethan followed, scanning corners automatically. Empty. Just broken shelving, a few rotted crates, and the smell of old oil soaked into wood. He shut the door, but didn't latch it. He positioned Lucas against the back wall where he could see both windows. Shadow took the center of the floor and lay down, not resting, waiting. Ethan stood to one side of the doorframe, not directly in line with it. Lucas stared at him. "We're just staying?" "For a minute," Ethan said. The hum outside shifted again, closer, then slightly farther, as if someone were adjusting range. "They're trying to isolate us," Lucas said, piecing it together. "Force us to call for help or move blindly." Ethan gave him a look that was almost approval. "You're learning." Lucas swallowed hard. "I don't want to be learning this." "No one does," Ethan said quietly. Shadow's ears twitched. A shadow moved past the small left window. Ethan didn't look directly. Peripheral vision caught more truth than focus. A crunch outside, then a voice, calm, controlled. "Deputy Reed?" Lucas flinched. "Deputy Reed?" the voice repeated. "Closer now. This is Lieutenant Carson, County Operations." Ethan's eyes didn't flicker. There was no Lieutenant Carson in County Operations. Lucas's breath hitched. "I don't—" Ethan lifted a finger. Silence. The voice continued, warm and reasonable. "We've got reports of a possible K-9 incident in this area. We're here to assist. You're out of bounds, Deputy. Let's keep this professional." Lucas's jaw trembled. "That's not—" he whispered. Ethan leaned close to his ear. "They're testing." Outside, footsteps shifted to the other side of the shed. "We know you've got something you shouldn't," the voice said more softly now. "Let's not make this worse." Shadow's body tightened. Her head rose from the floor without sound. Ethan felt it before he heard it, the faint scuff of someone positioning near the door hinge. They were setting up. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. One bar flickered, then vanished. He didn't need signal yet. He needed proximity. He spoke low to Lucas. "When they breach, you speak again. Same tone, loud. You say, 'Captain Hayes and Dr. Moore are monitoring this engagement.'" Lucas blinked. "They're not." "They might be," Ethan said. "And if they're not, the idea's enough." Shadow's ears locked. The door handle shifted. Slow. Testing resistance. Ethan didn't move. He let them commit. The handle jerked harder. Then the door burst inward. Two figures flooded the threshold, neutral winter gear, faces partially masked, weapons low, but ready. Shadow launched. No bark, just explosive motion. She hit the lead figure at chest height, driving him backward into the snow outside the shed. Not a bite, an impact that stole balance. The second figure swung his weapon up. Ethan was already there. He stepped into the line, deflecting the barrel sideways and driving his shoulder into the man's torso with controlled force. Not rage, precision. They hit the snow together. Ethan's knee found the man's wrist. A twist. The weapon dropped. "Police K-9!" Ethan shouted. "Drop it!" Lucas's voice cut through the clearing, cracking but loud. "Captain Hayes and Dr. Moore are monitoring this engagement. You are being recorded." The words echoed off trees. The first figure struggled under Shadow's weight. Shadow's teeth hovered inches from the man's throat, not touching, just promising. The second figure froze under Ethan's hold, breath fogging hard. For a heartbeat, the forest went still. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees came a third voice. "Stand down!" Not panicked, not rushed. Command. The two men beneath Ethan and Shadow went rigid. Ethan's gaze shifted. A third figure stepped into the clearing slowly. Different stance, different authority, hands visible. "Let's not escalate this," the newcomer said calmly. "No one needs to get hurt." Ethan didn't ease pressure. "You've already escalated it," he replied. The third man's eyes flicked to Lucas. "You don't understand what you're carrying, deputy." Lucas's voice shook but held. "Evidence of internal fraud." The man's lips thinned. "You're out of your depth." Ethan's tone stayed level. "So are you." The man's gaze moved to Shadow. Shadow stared back, amber eyes unwavering. "You've turned this into something public," the man said softly. "That complicates things." "Good," Ethan said. Silence stretched. Snow fell between them. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, he didn't check it. The third man's jaw tightened slightly. "Deputy Reed," he said, voice dropping, "we can make this disappear quietly. No charges, no record. You walk away." Lucas's knuckles went white around the drive inside his jacket. Ethan felt the tremor in him. "Say it," Ethan murmured under his breath. Lucas swallowed, then louder. "I have physical evidence of unauthorized routing and signature replication using Captain Hayes' credentials. If I disappear, that evidence goes public." The third man's composure cracked for half a second. That was enough. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, applying just a bit more pressure to the man beneath him. "Names," Ethan said. The third man's eyes hardened. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly," Ethan replied. Shadow's low growl vibrated against the chest of the man beneath her. Not loud, just present. The third man glanced back into the trees, calculating. They'd expected panic. They'd expected flight. They hadn't expected containment. Ethan spoke again, louder. "Captain Hayes is aware of this location." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The third man's shoulders tightened. Lucas's radio crackled faintly. A whisper of signal. Then a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Cole, this is Hayes. Do you copy?" The third man's head snapped toward the sound. Lucas stared at his radio like it had resurrected. Ethan didn't smile. He simply said calmly, "Copy, Captain." The hum in the air faltered. The third man looked over his shoulder again. Back up, not local, not controllable. That changed the math. Ethan held the stare. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Names." The third man's lips parted. Snow caught in his eyelashes. He exhaled slowly. "We were told to recover the material and neutralize witnesses," he said. "By who?" Ethan asked. The man hesitated. Shadow's growl deepened by a fraction. The man's eyes flicked down. "Routing came from internal command override, using Hayes' authorization signature." "And who authorized that override?" Ethan pressed. The man's composure thinned. Unknown." A lie. Ethan saw it in the micro-tension around the eyes. But it was enough. Enough to prove coordination. Enough to confirm conspiracy. Enough to justify escalation beyond local control. The third man stepped back. "We're leaving," he said. Ethan didn't stop them. He didn't need to. Shadow held position until Ethan gave the quiet cue. "Shadow, release!" She stepped back instantly. The two subdued men scrambled up and retreated toward the trees without looking back. The third man lingered one heartbeat longer. His gaze settled on Ethan. "This isn't over," he said softly. Ethan's voice was steady. "It is for you." The man disappeared into the forest. The hum died completely. The air went still. Lucas collapsed backward against the shed wall, breath shaking. "Oh my God," he whispered. Ethan rose slowly. He scanned the clearing, listening for return movement. Nothing. Shadow stood beside him, chest rising, eyes bright. Ethan finally checked his phone. 3 bars. A missed message from Dr. Moore. Jammer frequency traced. Unauthorized hardware detected. Data archived. He exhaled slowly. The first phase was done. They'd forced contact, forced admission, forced retreat. Lucas looked up at him, stunned. "Did we just—" "We survived," Ethan said. He extended a hand and pulled Lucas to his feet. Hayes' voice came through again, stronger now. "Cole, state oversight en route. 15 minutes." Ethan looked toward the tree line where the men had vanished. They wouldn't be back. Not with oversight coming, not with the narrative compromised. "Copy," Ethan said. Shadow bumped his thigh lightly. He looked down at her. "Good work," he murmured. Her tail swept once across the snow, controlled, satisfied. Lucas stared at them both. "I almost believed them," he admitted quietly. Ethan nodded. "That's the point of men like that," he said. "They don't need to shout, they just need you to doubt." Sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. Different rhythm, different authority. The forest felt different now, not predator silence, accountability. Ethan rested a hand briefly on Shadow's head. The night had tried to close over them. It had almost succeeded. But sometimes survival wasn't about overpowering danger. It was about forcing danger into the light. And tonight, light was coming. The first siren cut through the forest like a blade, not the frantic wail of local patrol units scrambling blind, but the controlled, rising tone of coordinated response. Purposeful. Timed. Lucas turned toward the sound with something like disbelief. "They actually came," he said. Ethan didn't answer. He was watching the tree line where the three men had disappeared, watching for a last desperate move, a long shot from cover, a final attempt to erase loose ends before oversight sealed the perimeter. Shadow stood at his side, body angled toward the woods, ears forward but no longer rigid. The threat wasn't gone, but it had shifted. Snow continued falling in thin, dry flakes that caught on Shadow's coat and melted into dark fur. The shed creaked softly behind them as wind brushed the warped metal. Hayes's voice crackled over the radio, now clean. "Cole, perimeter units are state level. They're not taking direction from county dispatch. You're clear to hold position." Ethan clicked his mic once. "Copy." Lucas let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was nothing funny in it. "I thought they were going to kill us," he said quietly. Ethan looked at him. "They were going to erase you," he corrected. There was a difference. Lucas swallowed hard. The first vehicle appeared at the far end of the logging spur, a black SUV with state insignia on the door. Behind it, two more units rolled in, lights flashing but sirens now silent. Professional. Contained. Doors opened. Officers stepped out in coordinated formation, scanning before moving. Captain Maria Hayes exited the lead SUV last. She didn't rush. She didn't perform panic. She walked toward Ethan and Lucas with the kind of controlled urgency that meant she was already running the next 10 moves in her head. Her eyes landed on Lucas first. "You're intact," she said, voice firm. Lucas nodded shakily. "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze shifted to Ethan. "You forced engagement?" "Yes." "Casualties?" "No." "Admissions?" "Partial," Ethan said. "Operational coordination confirmed. Override routing using your signature." Hayes' jaw tightened. Not with anger, with resolve. Dr. Lena Moore stepped out of the second vehicle, tablet already in hand, glasses slipping down her nose as she walked, and reviewed data simultaneously. "Ethan," she said without preamble, "the jammer frequency was military grade, purchased through a shell vendor tied to an internal procurement chain. Someone had clearance to sign that request." Hayes's expression hardened further. "Chain of custody on the drive?" she asked. Lucas stepped forward, holding it out with both hands like it was fragile glass. "Never left me," he said. Lena accepted it carefully. "Good," she murmured. "We'll clone it immediately." Behind them, state officers fanned out through the trees, securing the immediate area. One knelt to examine boot impressions near the shed entrance. "They won't find much," Ethan said. "They moved light." Hayes gave him a sharp look. "You recognize the lead?" "No name," Ethan replied. "But he wasn't improvising." Hayes nodded slowly. "This wasn't rogue deputies," she said. "This was structured." Lucas looked between them. "So what happens now?" Hayes met his gaze directly. "Now," she said, "we make it impossible to bury." They didn't move the engagement site immediately. Instead, Hayes ordered a mobile evidence unit to process the shed interior and clearing exactly as it stood. "Why?" Lucas asked quietly. "Because even a failed ambush leaves fingerprints," Lena replied. "Boot pressure variations, device interference residue, impact patterns. Absence can be evidence." Shadow watched the movement with quiet interest, tail low and steady. A state officer approached Ethan. "Sir, we recovered a small metal fragment near the tree line," he said. "Looks like part of an antenna housing." Ethan nodded once. "They dropped it when they repositioned the jammer," he said. The officer bagged it carefully. Hayes turned to Ethan again. "You could have disengaged," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was analysis. "They'd just reset the board," Ethan answered. "We needed them to show intent." Hayes' eyes held his for a moment longer. Intent, she repeated quietly. She turned away and began issuing orders. Lena crouched beside Lucas, already examining the drive. "You did well," she said, not looking up. Lucas gave a shaky exhale. "I was terrified." "That's compatible with integrity," Lena replied calmly. Shadow stepped closer to Lucas and leaned lightly into his leg. Lucas glanced down at her. "I guess she knew," he murmured. Lena allowed herself the smallest smile. She usually does. Containment becomes exposure. Within 40 minutes, the shed area was sealed under state oversight. A temporary command tent went up near the access road. Ethan stood just outside it, watching the forest where the 3 men had vanished. "They won't come back tonight," Hayes said quietly beside him. "No," Ethan agreed. "They'll pivot," she continued. "Paperwork, narrative control. They'll try to spin this as an overreaction." Ethan nodded once. "Then we make sure the record doesn't belong to them." Hayes studied him. "You're not law enforcement," she said. "Not anymore." "But you think like someone who still is." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I think like someone who's seen how silence works." Hayes held that in her eyes for a long moment. Then she said, "You're staying in this until it's finished." It wasn't a question. Ethan glanced at Shadow. Shadow met his gaze with steady certainty. He nodded once. "The drive speaks." Inside the command tent, Lena connected the drive to a secured forensic terminal. The first folder opened. Routing logs, authorization stamps, time-stamped overrides. Every override carried Captain Hayes' digital signature. But Lena zoomed in on the metadata. "There," she said. Hayes stepped closer. "What?" "Microsecond offset in the signature timestamp," Lena replied. "It's a replication, clean, almost perfect, but not live authenticated. Someone cloned your credentials." Hayes' jaw set. "Who has that level of access?" she asked. Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened another folder. Procurement orders, hardware acquisition, signal suppressor equipment, authorized under internal operations budget, signed using the same replicated credential chain. Lucas stared at the screen. That's tonight's jammer," he whispered. "Yes," Lena said. Hayes' expression went from controlled to lethal calm. "This isn't a rogue unit," she said. "No," Lena replied. "It's structural." Ethan stood at the tent entrance, listening. He felt no triumph, only alignment. The wrong thing had taken shape. Now it had edges. The decision. Hayes stepped out of the tent and called Ethan over. "We escalate to federal," she said. Ethan didn't blink. "Good." "Internal affairs won't touch this," Hayes continued. "Too many conflicts. If the signature chain's compromised, that's systemic." Lena emerged behind her. "I've already forwarded encrypted copies to a federal oversight contact," she said. "Time-stamped." Hayes nodded once. "Then we move fast." Lucas shifted on his feet. "What about the men tonight?" he asked. Hayes looked at him directly. "They've already started building a counter-story," she said. "We need to reach the point where their narrative doesn't matter." Ethan crossed his arms. "They'll try to isolate you, Lucas," he said. "Make you doubt what you saw. Offer you an exit." Lucas swallowed. "I won't take it," he said. Ethan believed him. Shadow nudged Lucas's knee gently. Hayes watched that exchange. "Deputy Reed," she said, voice firm but not unkind, "you understand this isn't about winning an argument. This is about surviving long enough for truth to outrun influence." Lucas nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The second movement. By dawn, the snow had thinned to a whisper. The shed, ravine, and clearing were mapped, photographed, scanned. The metal antenna fragment bagged. Boot impressions measured. Lena documented the jammer's residual frequency echo across the valley. Hayes issued an official statement, not public, but recorded internally, declaring that any routing under her authorization would now require live, multi-factor authentication. She closed the loophole. The forest lightened. Ethan felt the shift in air pressure, the difference between night decisions and morning consequences. Hayes approached him one last time before heading back to headquarters. "This won't end quietly," she said. "It shouldn't," Ethan replied. She looked at Shadow. "You're the reason we got admissions instead of gunfire," she said softly. Shadow blinked once. Hayes gave a tight nod. "Thank you." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't need to. Aftermath of the first night. By mid-morning, federal liaison officers had arrived, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably outside local command. The drive was transferred under sealed chain of custody. The jammer hardware signature was matched to a procurement chain now under review. And somewhere in an office that hadn't expected friction, someone realized the box hadn't closed the way they planned. Ethan watched the vehicles depart one by one. Lucas stood beside him. "I didn't know it could go this far," Lucas admitted. Ethan looked at him steadily. "Corruption doesn't start loud," he said. "It starts convenient." Lucas nodded slowly. Shadow turned her head toward the forest. Her posture relaxed. The hunt was over, for now. Ethan rested a hand briefly on her neck. "You did good," he murmured. Her tail swept once across the snow. Not celebration, confirmation. The forest had tried to swallow a story. Instead, it had created one. And the difference between those outcomes hadn't been firepower. It had been discernment. The willingness to stop when something felt wrong. And the discipline to turn wrongness into proof. Hayes' final words before leaving echoed in Ethan's mind. "This isn't about winning an argument. It's about surviving long enough for truth to outrun influence." Ethan watched the last vehicle disappear down the logging road. Then he turned back toward the trees. Shadow moved beside him without command. Black Ridge was quiet again, but it was a different quiet, not predatory, accountable. And somewhere beyond the snow and pines, a chain had begun to crack. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the forest had already started pretending none of it happened. That was its gift, and its danger. Snow filled shallow boot impressions, wind erased edges. The shed looked abandoned again, just rust and memory. But data didn't melt, and neither did admissions. Ethan walked Lucas back toward the access road where state units had established a temporary command perimeter. Shadow moved slightly ahead now, not hunting, not guarding, just steady. Lucas had gone quiet. Shock didn't look like shaking anymore. It looked like inward focus. "You're replaying it," Ethan said. Lucas glanced up. "Yeah? Good," Ethan replied. Lucas frowned. "Good? Memory is evidence," Ethan said. "Don't let anyone soften it for you." Lucas nodded slowly. They reached the command tent just as Dr. Lena Moore stepped out, tablet tucked under one arm, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes," she was saying calmly, "the signature replication shows non-random offset. It's mathematically deliberate. No, that's not a coincidence. That's fraud." She ended the call and turned to them. "Federal liaison confirmed receipt," she said. "They're opening a parallel investigation outside county jurisdiction." Lucas exhaled in visible relief. "So that's it?" he asked. "We won?" Lena's eyes flicked toward Ethan briefly before settling back on Lucas. "This is the first page," she said gently, "not the last. Pressure moves upward." Captain Maria Hayes didn't return to headquarters quietly. She walked in through the front entrance at 0900, uniform crisp, posture straight, and announced a temporary operational freeze on all discretionary routing authorizations tied to her credentials. Half the department didn't understand. The other half went very still. Internal Affairs was notified, not through standard channels, but directly through state-level oversight. By noon, an audit team had begun isolating server access logs. By 1400, someone inside procurement realized that hardware acquisition records were being pulled under federal review. The men who had stood outside the shed the night before weren't freelancers. They were pieces, and pieces belonged to a structure. Structures didn't like light. The call at 1537, Ethan's phone buzzed. He stepped away from the temporary perimeter to answer. "Cole?" "Ethan." Hayes' voice carried a new tone, harder. "We have confirmation." "Of?" "The authorization chain. It routes through a deputy operations coordinator with access to credential mirroring software." Ethan absorbed it. "Name?" Hayes hesitated a fraction. "Deputy Operations Chief, Mark Fallon." Ethan didn't know the name personally, but he recognized the position. Close enough to power to touch it. Far enough to deny it. "He signed tonight's recovery order?" Ethan asked. "He initiated the override," Hayes confirmed, "and he's been in the building since 0700. "Has he moved?" Ethan asked. "No?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Then he's confident." "Yes." Hayes lowered her voice. "He requested a meeting with me at 1600. Ethan didn't pause. "Take it." "You're not in this building," Hayes said. "I don't need to be," Ethan replied. "Record it." A breath passed through the line. "You think he'll confess?" "No," Ethan said evenly. "I think he'll underestimate you." Inside headquarters. At exactly 1600, Mark Fallon walked into Hayes' office, tall, controlled, silver at the temples but not fully gray, the kind of man who moved like every room belonged to him. He closed the door gently behind him. "Captain," he said, voice warm, almost sympathetic, "rough night." Hayes didn't invite him to sit. "You authorized routing overrides using my credentials," she said flatly. Fallon's brows lifted slightly. Not surprised, not flustered. "Maria," he said calmly, "we both know emergency channels sometimes require flexibility." "Flexibility," Hayes repeated. Fallon smiled faintly. "We had intelligence suggesting a leak," he said. "Deputy Reed has been moving material outside proper chain of command." Hayes' voice didn't rise. "Chain of command is not a synonym for concealment." Fallon's eyes cooled a fraction. "You're reacting emotionally," he said gently. "State oversight involvement, federal inquiry, that damages the department." "Integrity protects it," Hayes replied. Fallon leaned forward slightly. "You're escalating based on incomplete data." Hayes tapped a tablet on her desk. "Metadata signature replication isn't incomplete." Fallon's expression tightened for the first time. "That's technical noise," he said. "A clerical error." Hayes' gaze sharpened. "Military-grade jammer hardware is not clerical." A beat of silence. Fallon's voice lowered. "You're going to create chaos over suspicion." Hayes didn't blink. "You created chaos when you weaponized emergency routing." For half a second, Fallon's composure slipped. Then it snapped back. "You can't prove intent," he said. Hayes leaned back in her chair. "I don't need to," she said calmly. "Federal prosecutors will." Fallon stared at her. "You're making a mistake." "No," Hayes said quietly. "I'm correcting one." The pivot back. At Black Ridge, Ethan stood with Lucas at the ridge where the first lights had appeared the night before. Shadow sat between them. "Why didn't they just shoot?" Lucas asked suddenly. Ethan considered the question. "Because dead bodies create paperwork," he said. "Disappearance creates confusion." Lucas looked down at Shadow. "And her?" "They didn't expect a variable they couldn't intimidate," Ethan said. Shadow blinked at the horizon. Lucas gave a short breath of disbelief. "She didn't even bark. She didn't need to." Ethan felt his phone vibrate again. Hayes. "It's confirmed," she said without preamble. "Fallon initiated override access at 19:02 yesterday. That's 2 minutes before you reported first signal interference." Ethan nodded. "Intent," he said quietly. "Yes," Hayes agreed. "Has he lawyered up?" Ethan asked. "Not yet," she said. "He thinks this can still be managed." "Good," Ethan replied. Hayes' voice softened slightly. "Ethan, thank you." He looked down at Shadow. "We heard something wrong," he said. "That's all." The fracture line. By the next morning, federal investigators had secured procurement offices and server mirrors. Fallon was escorted, not arrested yet, but contained. Internal Affairs opened a formal review into credential replication. Local press caught wind of operational irregularities. No details, but enough to signal tremor. Lucas sat at a long conference table with Lena reviewing routing logs. His fear had transformed into focus. "You see this pattern?" Lena asked, pointing. Lucas leaned closer. "The override only activates during low-staff windows," he murmured. "Yes," Lena said. "Reduced witnesses." Lucas's jaw set. "They've done this before." Lena nodded. "That's what we're confirming." Shadow lay at Ethan's feet under the table. Calm. Grounded. The presence of a steady heartbeat in a room where trust had fractured. The confrontation. 2 days later, federal warrants were signed. Fallon was formally charged with abuse of authority and conspiracy tied to falsified routing and equipment misuse. But the real fracture came during questioning, because Fallon had not acted alone, and men like Fallon didn't absorb pressure well when faced with inevitability. Under federal interrogation, recorded, mirrored, undeniable, he admitted that a senior county official had directed him to contain potential leaks tied to budget reallocation, tied to environmental land transfers. It wasn't about the drive. It wasn't about Lucas. It was about structural protection of a corrupt financial loop. And the shed in the snow had cracked it open. Returned to the ridge. A week after the first night, Ethan stood again on the ridge where Shadow had first stopped. The forest looked innocent. Always did. Lucas joined him. "They're expanding the investigation," he said. "More names." Ethan nodded. "Good." Lucas glanced at him. "I don't think I would have stood my ground without you." Ethan looked toward the tree line. "You would have," he said. Lucas shook his head. "No, I would have doubted myself." Ethan considered that. "Then remember this feeling," he said, "the moment you didn't." Shadow stood and stretched, then nudged Ethan's thigh. "Time to move." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah," he murmured. They started down the ridge together, not triumphant, not loud, just aligned. The forest had tried to close around a lie. Instead, it had amplified it. And sometimes that was enough. The courtroom didn't smell like justice. It smelled like paper, ink, polished wood, old air that had carried 1,000 arguments before this one and would carry 1,000 more after. But the weight in the room was different. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just inevitable. Deputy Operations Chief Mark Fallon sat at the defense table in a tailored suit that fit him as precisely as his confidence once had. His posture remained straight. His hands rested calmly in front of him. He looked like a man who had never expected to sit there. Across the aisle, Captain Maria Hayes sat without uniform ribbons. No decoration, no theater, just presence. Dr. Lena Moore sat beside her, hands folded neatly over a binder that contained enough metadata to collapse careers. Deputy Lucas Reed sat one row behind them. And Officer Ethan Cole? He wasn't inside. He didn't like courtrooms. He stood outside under a gray sky with K-9 Shadow sitting at his side, watching courthouse steps as if they were just another ridgeline. The testimony inside, the federal prosecutor walked the jury through the chain. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. On the night of February 9th, the prosecutor began, routing credentials assigned to Captain Hayes were duplicated and used to issue a quiet rescue directive outside standard dispatch protocol. A screen illuminated. Timestamps, signature replication logs, microsecond offsets. The jury leaned forward. Dr. Lena Moore testified with the calm detachment of someone who didn't need drama to win. "The digital signature appears authentic at surface level," she explained, "but deeper inspection reveals a replicated credential executed through administrative override access. That level of access requires senior authorization." "Senior authorization by whom?" the prosecutor asked. "Deputy Operations Chief Mark Fallon," Lena replied. Fallon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The prosecutor continued. "Signal suppressor hardware used in the field was acquired under procurement approval routed through Fallon's office. That hardware created deliberate communication interference during the attempted containment of Deputy Reed." The word containment landed heavy. Not rescue, not confusion. Containment. Lucas swallowed in the gallery, because that word had nearly been his obituary. The admission. The defense attempted deflection. They argued procedural misunderstanding, overzealous internal correction, administrative miscommunication. But the prosecution had something harder than narrative. They had recorded audio. Because when Ethan had forced the engagement in the shed and Lucas had spoken loudly about oversight, Lena had activated silent recording software on the re-established channel. The admission wasn't a full confession. It didn't need to be. The third man's voice, calm and controlled, carried through the courtroom speakers. "Ando." Routing came from internal command override using Hayes's authorization signature. Then the prosecutor paused and played Fallon's own internal meeting recording. Hayes's voice, firm, Fallon's defensive. "You authorized routing overrides using my credentials. Emergency channels sometimes require flexibility." Flexibility. The word echoed. In context, it sounded like justification. In court, it sounded like intent, the structural break. The verdict didn't take long, because juries don't require perfection. They require pattern. And the pattern was undeniable. Guilty, on conspiracy, on abuse of authority, on procurement fraud, on obstruction of justice. Fallon didn't collapse when the word was read. Men like him never did. He simply sat very still. And for a brief, unguarded second, something drained from his eyes. Control. Outside the steps, the courthouse doors opened. Reporters surged forward. Microphones lifted. Questions flew. Hayes stepped out first. "The department will undergo full structural audit," she stated clearly. "Integrity is not optional. It is foundational." Lena declined interviews. Lucas hesitated before stepping down the stairs. Then he saw Ethan. And Shadow. Shadow's tail moved once. Lucas walked over. "They convicted," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I heard." Lucas hesitated. "You knew they would, didn't you?" Ethan considered that. "No," he said. "I knew we gave them something they couldn't ignore." Lucas looked at Shadow. "She changed everything," he murmured. Shadow blinked slowly. Ethan rested a hand on her head. "She enforced the line," he said. The quiet after weeks passed. Audits expanded. 2 additional administrators resigned under investigation. Procurement processes were rebuilt from the ground up. Routing credentials were redesigned to require biometric validation. Internal oversight committees were reshaped under state supervision. The structure bent, but it didn't collapse entirely. Institutions rarely do. They fracture, then rebuild, sometimes stronger, sometimes not. But the difference is whether someone stopped walking when something felt wrong. The visit on a late afternoon in early spring, Lucas drove north. He parked near the same ridge where the first lights had appeared. Ethan was already there. Shadow sat beside him, watching thawing snow drip from branches. Lucas walked up slowly. "I transferred," he said. Ethan glanced at him. "Where?" "Internal oversight," Lucas replied. "State level." Ethan's eyes held his for a moment. "That fits." Lucas looked down at Shadow. "I don't think I would have survived that night alone." Ethan shook his head slightly. "You weren't alone," he said. Lucas smiled faintly. "I know." Shadow stood and nudged Lucas's hand with her nose. Lucas laughed quietly. "I brought something," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal disc, a department-issued commendation coin. On one side, a badge. On the other, a K9 silhouette. Lucas knelt and placed it gently in front of Shadow. "For the one who enforced the line," he said softly. Shadow sniffed it once, then sat, satisfied. Ethan picked up the coin and turned it in his fingers. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Lucas stood. "I don't ignore that feeling anymore," he said. Ethan nodded once. "Good." Lucas looked toward the forest. "It still feels quiet." Ethan followed his gaze. "Quiet doesn't mean safe," he said. Lucas smiled faintly. "I know." He turned and walked back toward his truck. Shadow watched him go, then looked up at Ethan. Ethan crouched slightly and met her eyes. "We did okay," he murmured. Shadow's tail swept once across thawing snow. The forest breathed. Not predatory, not silent, just steady. Ethan stood and looked across Black Ridge one last time before heading home. He didn't feel triumph. He felt alignment. A wrong thing had tried to take shape. He'd stopped it from solidifying. That was enough. Because in the end, justice wasn't thunder. It wasn't applause. It was the quiet refusal to look away when something didn't fit. It was a deputy speaking when silence was safer, a captain standing when pressure was easier, an analyst counting honestly, and a K9 who didn't need words to decide what mattered. The snow had tried to bury the story, but truth, when built correctly, outlived the weather.